Today on UThink, we are privileged to be joined by Aaron McDonald, Principal of Youth Off the Streets, an organisation dedicated to supporting and empowering vulnerable young people through education, wellbeing and connection. Aaron brings extensive experience working within boys' education and youth-focused context, alongside many years involved in coaching and mentoring through rugby league. He leads with compassion, authenticity, and a deep belief in the potential of every young person, particularly those who may have felt disconnected from traditional schooling or overlooked by society.
Yeah, we talked about every interaction is an intervention, so every time you have a conversation with a student, every interaction you have has the power to either harm or heal, and we need to
Yes.
be really careful and conscious. And our education model talks about conscious pedagogy, and that's in the classroom, but it's also every interaction you have, has that
Yes.
ability to be transformative for a young person, or even, another colleague.
In this conversation, we explore the power of relationships, hope, alternative education, and what it truly means to help young people rediscover belief in themselves. Today's episode is proudly supported by the Styling Crew, specialists in property styling and staging that help transform houses into homes buyers will remember forever. Welcome, Aaron.
Thank you.
Welcome to UThink. I reached out to you and I said, Aaron, I know you're doing amazing things. You're a principal with Youth Off the Streets. And I hope today we're going to be able to unpack the impact you're having with some very important young people in our
Do our best.
We do our best. Okay, well, but before we get into what Youth Off the Streets is and how it started, and of course we know that it's associated with a very amazing man who's no longer with us,
Yep.
Father Chris Riley. But Aaron, tell me a little bit more about your story.
I don't know if I have much of a story, to tell you the truth. So I suppose grew up in a really loving family in Greystones. Attended an all-boys school for my high schooling. From there, I was really interested in sport and had a couple of years off and went over to America and worked in summer camps over there.
So when you say sport, it's footy,
Rugby league, yep.
Rugby league.
Yep. So so rugby league, and then after spending a couple of years like traveling and I suppose just figuring out what I wanted to do in life, I decided to go into teaching. So trained as a PE teacher.
And that's the connection that we have as well.
Yep, there's another one.
Yeah.
Yep.
So my husband's a PE teacher, you're a PE teacher, and that's how you know each other, plus the rugby.
That rugby league, yep. So I went into PE teaching, and then so I spent the first part of my career in all boys education, and really enjoyed that. And then some other opportunities came up. So I've travelled, I suppose, throughout co-ed schools, single set schools in both boys and girls. And now find myself at Youth Off the Streets. In between there, a bit of a journey into the RE world as well, so religious education. Spent about 10 years as a leader of mission, or REC.
Wow.
In Catholic schools. And
that would have really formed your sense of compassion and empathy, because those foundations of values of things such as forgiveness, loving unconditionally, that certainly forms us, doesn't it, in terms of...
Yeah, very much so. And I think... that journey itself, like going into an REC role, was quite bizarre in the first place, because it was never on my bingo card, I suppose.
Yeah.
And a person who was acting, in the role of REC before me, was going into a secondment role, and tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Look, I think you should do this." It was an all-boys school. I was at the time. They're like, you have a faith. The boys love you because of footy. And they see you as a role model, so it'd be a really
and in boys'
good thing
schools
to
in
do.
particular, a role model is huge.
Oh, without
a
a doubt.
male role model
Yep.
is obviously huge, because they need to see you as vulnerable, still whatever you need to do in terms of your sport or whatever other hobby you have.
Yeah.
But the fact that you stood up in front of them as someone of faith, that would have been also pretty powerful.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I think the faith and I think teaching are so interconnected. And I think the journey of, I suppose, myself in that, but also the idea of what Jesus did, and who Jesus was as a person, and helping vulnerable people, helping others, is such a simple thing to do. And whether you have a faith or not, like the person of Jesus is someone who we can all use as a role model.
I 100% agree. Often people say to me, "Rosa, you're a practicing Catholic." I've always had a bit of an issue with that because I think there was always an underlying judgment to that statement. And I think I'm practicing because, like you, I have a really strong belief in doing the right thing for people, particularly vulnerable people, always standing up for the person that may not be able to stand up for themselves. And I think, like you, it comes from a really deep respect for who Jesus was as a person and what he stood for and what he did. And so I may not do the bells and whistles of what the traditional practicing Catholic does.
Mm.
I may not stand up like them in church, but I believe I walk a very, strong path
Yeah.
in terms of how I am respectful to people and always putting kindness first.
And I think that was probably the reason I was tapped on the shoulder at the time was that it was I was never going to do pretty prayer. It was an all boys school, so I
I
don't know
like that,
whether
pretty prayer.
it was a requirement of the job as such, but the role modelling and actually living the faith. And I think that key word practicing Catholic, like we're all practicing.
Yeah.
Like we don't get it right all the time.
Yeah, but it doesn't have to be a show. It
Yeah.
doesn't have to be something that you do that other people can tick off for you.
Yeah.
I think it's a belief, and it's in your words and it's in your actions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think if we can teach people to be good humans, at the end of the day, and if we want to, talk on the footy part of it, like I always say, good people before good players, because
Yeah.
we want to make sure that, whatever we're doing, we're producing good human beings.
Well, that's a nice segue because obviously you were RSC for a while, and then this position of principal of Youth Off the Streets became, available.
Yeah.
So before we go into that role, Youth Off the Streets was always synonymous for me with Father Chris O'Reilly. It's O'Reilly, isn't it? Or Riley?
Riley. Yeah,
Riley.
Riley. Yep.
Yep.
So take the O
And,
off.
yeah,
Yep.
get the O off. And a long time ago, I did some charitable work when I was a teacher in an all-boys school, and we share that at Holy
Yep.
Cross. I think I was there just before you.
Mm-hmm.
And there were some great initiatives that he was doing to try and raise money to keep his vans going.
Yeah.
Because in the beginning, it was vans for the homeless people.
Yeah, very much so. His work started when he was actually at Boys Town. He'd go out overnight time and down to King's Cross and
Yep.
feed homeless people and try and take care of those people and connect with them. And I think that's probably the big part was the connection part, and connecting with them and letting them know that people cared.
Yeah, giving them a coffee, something warm to eat, and a safe space to talk.
Yeah, very
He
much
was
so.
very much advocating for that. If you want to have a chat, I'm just going to listen and no judgment.
Yeah.
And so that grew and it got legs.
Yep. So drew and got leads, and so there was some work done in Cabramatta around the 5T gangs at the time,
Yes.
and Father Chris met up with one of the local detectives, and they started a little school and a cafe for gang members with a couple of rules around no weapons, no deals, and they needed to attend school a couple of days a week. So that gave those young people a chance who, I suppose, felt that they didn't have a place in traditional schooling or mainstream schooling, and
Yeah.
there's a lot of reasons as to why, and we'll go into that throughout this chat, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And then from there, opened up the first school, Key College, and I'm thinking it's probably around 30 years ago now in
Yep.
that. Since then, we've expanded, so we have 7 schools across New South Wales, from Wollongong through to now Maitland. We opened up our 7th school a few weeks ago. So it's been quite a journey. And I suppose that key college part is the idea that education is the key to breaking the cycle. And if we can
Yeah.
do that, then hopefully we can get these young people who are at risk to reach their potential and contribute to the world.
Well, and not only just contribute, but thrive in the world because we want to have young people have options and have hope. And as you said, traditional or mainstream education may not always fit, but they're not. So you talked about the 5T gangs in Cabramatta. That's one group of kids, right? They are
Yep.
choosing to leave school because maybe financially being in gangs is more fruitful for them.
Mm-hmm.
It's an identity or belonging. Gangs were really about,
Yep.
finding
Belonging. Yep.
belonging. But they're not just your clientele. So
No.
tell me a little bit about the type of child who comes to, and it's not just boys, is that correct?
No,
It's-
so co-ed. So our clientele, we're a special assistance school, so there's criteria that students have to meet in order to attend our school. But I suppose our main core focus group is homeless people or those at risk of being homeless. So when you talk about at risk of being homeless, it then opens up a range of other factors, school refusal, people who, and I think COVID, has probably produced more of those
Yeah, there's some
in a
really
way.
deep research coming out now about how young people were traumatized through COVID because of the isolation, and they were going down that technology, deep, dark, tunnels of
Yep.
technology, and becoming even more
Yeah,
isolated,
withdrawn and
withdrawn.
isolated.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then we have a range of like mental health factors, circumstances that they've been born into.
So
Um,
domestic violence, family
yep,
violence.
yep,
So they could also be
trauma.
so children who might have parents who now go to jail
Yep,
and they become homeless as a result of actual.
yeah. So in care of the minister.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of young people out of home care. Have a lot of First Nations young people. So I think one of my schools has 44% First Nations students at the school. Most traditional schools would probably hold about 3% young people of First Nations, and we average about 35% of
Wow.
young people
That's
in our
right.
schools.
The average is actually 2% for
Yep.
First Nations. So anything above 2%, they say is, big. And you're at 30.
Yeah, so about 35% across our schools, and
Yeah.
like one of my schools right now is at 44%.
Wow.
Yep. So in saying that too, we have the support. And that's one of the great things about Youth Off the Streets is the support that we give our young people. So we have a First Nations team as part of our organisation. A couple of our bigger schools have First Nations youth support workers in there. So yeah, we do a lot to make sure that we make them feel, all young people feel as though they belong and that they're safe in the
So, for
schools.
the sake of our listeners, what does a youth off the street school look like? I know that is it like the mainstream or traditional? What does it feel and look like for a student?
Yeah, I think they're all really different. So I look after the three of our schools. So we've got Bowen College in Maroubra, Eden College at Macquarie Fields, and Davis College at Wollongong. That campus actually on the innovation campus at the university. So
Oh, that's great.
so that campus probably looks more like a traditional school. Um, I think a lot of the time it goes down to who's there, and the students and being responsive to the students in our school. So we do try to set our classrooms up differently to a mainstream classroom. So there'll be safe spaces for our young people to take themselves away from their desks and sit down. There might be some beanbags in the room. We try and have a central table because we do a lot of work in what we call circles and try and do some direct instruction in those circles. But then we give the students an opportunity to go back to a single desk that faces the wall, so they can concentrate and not be distracted, and also own that space. So a traditional high school, you're changing classrooms every 60 minutes. Most of our schools operate where the young people stay in the classroom and our teaching staff actually
And I can
change.
understand why you would do that because it's about routines. It's about giving them a sense of like safety
Yep,
and not just disrupting their day. Because
yep.
I could only imagine that if they had to keep moving, it would could
Could be quite chaotic at times.
yes.
Yeah, yeah. So we do try and do some different things. Most of our schools will also have a chill out space. That students can access. And it's probably then the support that we offer that is different to a mainstream
So you
school.
said you already had a First Nations team. I'm also guessing that you would have a strong like wellbeing group, like either counselling, careers people.
Yep. So let's go with all of the above, and I'll probably go through our education model. So we look at one teaching staff for 13 students. So already you have quite a different support network
And
there.
is that stage based? So is it like 13 students who are in years 7 and 8 working together, or is it based on their ability? Are you like getting the data and sort of saying, well, even though he's 17, he's only really operating at a 13-year-old
Yeah.
age?
So once again, based on the schools. So our schools are year 9 through to year 12. Some of our schools are only stage 5, so year 9 and 10. So we have some schools that are stage 5 only, some that go through to stage 5 and stage 6. And yeah, it is very much based on the school once again. So some of our schools will have year groups as such. They'll have year 9, year 10, year 11, year 12 class. Others are stage based. And very, very flexible in the approach to I suppose teaching and learning.
Yeah.
But with our support, so we have so one teacher to 13 students. We'll have SLSOs as part of
Yes.
our structure that's been introduced in the last couple of years.
And for those who don't know what that is, that's a student support learning officer.
Yep. So and they'll do a lot of our intervention work as well.
And are they from the universities? Are they graduate
So
teachers?
it's an interesting thing. So we've actually just had our first partnership with Nexus. So
Oh, good.
so we've got a Nexus student at the moment who's working as an SLSO 1 or 2 days a week to train into becoming a teacher. So a mature age student who's
Yeah,
come
great.
back in already. So but a lot of them are experienced SLSOs from other systems who have come over. And then some do want to train to be teachers, so we're trying to support that to make sure.
And
that
the
we can
government
do
has some
that.
great scholarships to
Yeah,
encourage
definitely.
that.
So we're very, very lucky there. And then I suppose the big difference for me is like in a mainstream school, and I've worked in schools of 1,200, 1,400 students, and you might have 2 psychologists on site part time, a couple of days a week. Our schools are based on having a counsellor or a psychologist there pretty much full time, depending on the size of the school. So one of my schools is only 15 young people at school, and they have a psychologist there 3 days a week. So they all get access to that
Yeah,
help.
that's so good.
My bigger schools have 2 psychologists or a psychologist and a counsellor. So everyone gets access to that mental health support if needed, and we try and give them as much support as possible. And then on top of that, we have youth workers who are there to help our young people throughout the day. They may be in class or they may be out of class doing some co-regulation with our young people. And we have a school manager on each of our sites. And we're also, I think, and quote me on it, because I'm pretty sure I'm right, we're the only school system in New South Wales, and I'm pretty sure Australia, that has domestic, family and sexual violence workers on site. So
Wow.
each of our school has a worker
And they all work together to really, because you said that most of those kids are either homeless or, as you said, at risk of being homeless. So there must be a lot of ground or background work on ensuring that when they leave your safe space, which is very well supported,
Yep.
that they can also have that outside of the,
Yes,
or they're at least looking to build that resilience.
Yeah, and I think with our wellbeing team, as we would call them, so that's our counsellors, psychologists, youth workers, domestic, family, sexual violence workers. Their job is to make sure too that they're connected outside. So we talked about a therapeutic web.
I love that.
So that idea that we need to be the webmasters at time and try and make sure they're connected to the people they need to be connected to. And when I suppose we talked about educare rather than education. So it isn't just about making sure that we do the curriculum. We need to do more than that because our young people deserve more.
I totally agree. And look, even I work in a mainstream or traditional school at the moment, and of course, we have the similar type of beliefs and support systems in place. Obviously, a whole lot less compared to what you're doing, and also we're not dealing with a concentrated group of
Yep.
children who are exposed to such trauma. But we still have trauma. Kids coming to us with various forms of trauma.
Yep.
And unfortunately, today in the world we live in, our kids are more exposed to that, which is the sad part.
Yeah, definitely.
And it makes me really passionate about young people and about what we can teach them, not just, as you said, just education, but to think beyond that and think about what skills they need to cope, but what hope we can instill in them so they can thrive.
Yeah, definitely. And I think like the idea that you're not going to be able to teach them until they feel safe.
Yeah.
So there's no point having young people come into a school and us sit there as educators and try and teach them and get them to learn when they're hungry, when they don't feel safe, when
When
they've
they
been
don't
up all
trust you
night.
as a teacher.
Yeah.
So trust and relationships. Well, you must be building your teachers. Let's go to that. What support are you giving your teachers? Because they are working in a really complex, microcosm of education. So what support do you give them, and what do they, how are they operating to be able to make those connections with kids so that there is trust that they can open up, but also we talked about when you first arrived, and we can do your wellness, your own wellness,
Yeah,
and their
definitely.
wellness.
Yeah. Look, it's a tough one because it's something that one of our CEO said at a training day one day, is that it's not our job to make you happy, it's our job to make sure that we support you to be well. Like so, and I kind of went, oh, that's a really interesting statement when I first heard it, but I thought, well, no, hang on, like there's a lot of truth in that. Like people need to look after their own happiness, but we need to make sure that they come to a place each day that's safe and that they feel that they
Supported.
can work on their wellness. Yeah. So So we have what's called a century model of care that comes from McKillop Foundation, and it's all about making sure that our staff and our young people are as well as they can be. Obviously, we have access to EAP. We do the wellbeing initiatives that every school does. Sometimes I think they're tokenistic, but we try and make sure to very big on stay in your lane. So our teaching staff are there to educate the young people. They don't need to be the problem solvers.
Great.
So when young people are experiencing trauma or there's something going on
There's
for
someone
them,
for that.
well, then the youth worker will pick them up, and if the youth worker can't co-regulate with them and help them to regulate, well, then we might go, okay, let's grab our psychologist or counsellor.
And that's powerful because we know, Aaron, you and I know that a lot of schools, they don't have that support.
Yeah.
And the teacher becomes nurse, counsellor,
everything, and teachers want to,
police officer.
And that's the thing. Teachers want to do that. Teachers want to be. Look, we all get in it because we want to help young people. That's why we all, I think, get into teaching in the first place. So when they hear something, they naturally want to help. And we love that about our teachers.
We do.
That's a really great
but
thing.
it does wear down on their ability to stay well themselves because
definitely.
of the burden that comes with that. Yeah.
So we try and make sure that part of that too is relationships and connection. So checking in with people. So we do circles every day, as I spoke about earlier. So we will check in with our staff each day. We do that with our young people as well. So the questions change, but essentially, how are you feeling? What is the goal for today? And then who might you go to for support or connection today? So we're checking in constantly. And as I suppose as principal, I sit there and just go, okay, well, let's go. Betty said that she was, feeling a bit exhausted today, a bit run down. I know that I'll need to go and check in on her later on that day and go, hey, what's going on for you right now? What might be happening that I can help with to try and take some of that load off you.
Yeah, because they might have their own stuff going on at home as well.
Well, everyone brings, an invisible backpack to school each day. Our young people do, but also our staff
I know.
do.
When I was, and I still do a lot of some casual academic work at Macquarie, where I talk to foundational pedagogy, and I put up a backpack on the screen, and I say, "What's in the backpack?" And they all go, "Books, pencils, rulers, calculators." They're really quick. These service teachers to
they're excited.
And then I say, "What else could be in there?" And they're like, "Lunch." And I go, "Can it always be in there? Like maybe, maybe not." So if they're hungry, what happens to them, and what other things do we not see that they could be carrying? And it's a really powerful moment for them to realise that there's a physical backpack, but in that there's also an emotional one and an invisible burden that these kids are bringing, and various levels of kids who are bringing.
Yeah, and I think, look, one of the great things I think, like I often talk to friends who are still in mainstream education, and I think young people are young people. Kids are kids. The great advantage that we have is that we know our kids' stories. And most people in a mainstream school, if you're teaching 180, 200 students,
it is hard. We try really hard to know our stories, but it's harder.
Yeah. So that's an advantage that we have. But yeah. So we try and connect with our staff and make sure that they know that they're cared for. We obviously have EAP and access to psychologists and counsellors if they would like to themselves. But we also have things like go-to plans, for our staff, so that when I do notice, that one of my colleagues might not be having a great day, I'm like, well, what's on your go-to plan that you might want to use right now that will help you, regulate, So, and we often, refer to each other's go-to plans or self-care plans, so that we can remind people when they're not having a great day.
Yeah.
Hey, like, do you want to go for a walk? Because sometimes our staff, across the board, so not just our teaching staff, but our youth workers, our counsellors, school managers might need that chance to say, well, hang on, I need to stop for a second here.
That's right.
And
we all
regulate
have
myself.
to. In whatever aspect of our life, our well-being is critical to our ability to function every day. So we really do need those reminders.
Yeah. So look, I think we do it well. I don't know if anyone does it perfectly, but we try really hard to invest in our staff to make sure that they're supported. And then obviously there's things that we do ourselves. So mentioned earlier, like I like to go for a swim each day. So that's a thing that I do for myself to make sure that I start each day with that idea. Okay, I'm sometimes I just have to wash the crap off. And
I'm
get
a
into
hiker.
the day.
I walk long hikes.
Yeah.
And I just get lost in those 10 to 12 hours of walking.
Yep.
I just love it. I can completely as you said, just let it all wash off me. And
Yeah.
I actually get most of my inspiration from that, like
Yeah.
thinking back about what
Well,
I,
when you don't have a phone and you can actually spend some time thinking.
yeah, or it gets
Um,
clarity. Every step I take, there's a sense of clarity that
yeah.
becomes, part of the motion.
Yeah.
Um,
So that's what we do. And look, yeah, I think it works most of the time.
yeah.
But it's really important that we remind ourselves that we need to look after ourselves, because you can't help someone whether you want to talk about the glass being empty. You can't pour from an empty
And you
glass.
wouldn't have people that would be working with the kids that are negative because that would be counterintuitive.
Yeah, and I think it's that's part of our, I suppose, our training as well. And making sure that we are aware of trauma informed practice. We are aware of what we bring each day. Um, is so important. And it's the little things sometimes, the sigh, the raised eyebrow, those kind of things that we need to teach ourselves not to go to, because we're all human.
Yeah.
And there are days where we're frustrated, but when you show that frustration to a young person,
They read it.
yeah,
They sense it and read it. We were very lucky at Knox, where I work, which is an amazing institution, such a traditional and well-built school in terms of its support for its students. But we had Carol Ann Tomlinson beam in from Canada,
yep,
and she's she's what they call the godmother of differentiation.
yep,
And she did a wonderful talk about what differentiation looks like and how teachers can do it. But there was something she said that struck a chord with every single teacher in that theatre. And she said there's this unwritten third level, third dimension to differentiation. She said, there's the traditional stuff, you vary the work for kids and pace and
yep,
chunking and modelling. And she went through all of those. But then she said the third dimension is how you speak to a child, how you look at a child, how you greet them when you first see them. She said that level is the access level to everything else you do.
yeah,
If you're miserable, they'll read it, they won't engage. If you don't smile at them, they won't smile at you. If you have a negative tone, they'll have a negative tone. And I could see people in the rooms really thinking about that. Like it was not that it wasn't new to them, but it was like a really good reminder
yeah. I
that
think.
when they look at you, they are looking at you, and your disposition, your body tells them whether you're open and someone that's safe.
Yeah, we talked about every interaction is an intervention. So every time you have a conversation with a student, every interaction you have has the power to either harm or heal. And we need to
Yes.
be really careful and conscious. And our education model talks about conscious pedagogy, and that's in the classroom. But it's also every interaction you have, has that
Yes.
ability to be transformative for a young person, or even another colleague. So if you're approaching intentionally every interaction you have with people, then you can be really, really conscious of, well, is what I'm doing right now going to hurt this person or harm this person, or is it going to help them to heal?
Yeah.
And I think we need to go towards the healing more often than the
That's right.
harm.
And we're not perfect. We're humans, so we're not going to have perfect. We're not. What's that movie? With Jim Carrey, where he says good morning, good evening, and good night.
Yep, I know the one you're talking about, but I can't think of the name of it as well. Yep.
And that's that utopia,
Yeah.
a perfect world that's been constructed. We're not that. We're
No.
humans, and on some days we're going to be tired ourselves, but I know that I make a conscious effort to, as you said, conscious effort. I greet my little year sevens every time I have a lesson,
Yep.
doesn't matter, by their name at the door. And I can sometimes see their reaction. Like they're
Yep.
coming to me and like they're tired, period 5. They stroll on in and I say good morning, Bailey, and good morning, Owen, and good morning, Jackie, and good morning. And they look at me and they smile.
Yep.
Oh, somebody just said my name.
Yep. Somebody cares, somebody knows me.
Yeah. And all of a sudden they sort of look and they sort of change their little walking strut as they
Yeah.
come into the room. Shoulders go up a little bit. I think
Yep.
that little bit is
Massive.
it's
Not
just
it's
a
not
little
little.
it's a really important
Yeah.
routine.
One of the things one of my first principals taught me when I started working in leadership was to be there at the start and the end of each day for students. So to try and greet them as they walked in and be there to say goodbye to them at the end.
Yeah.
Because it's those connection pieces that allow you to then do your work
Yeah.
later on.
Yeah.
So
If you're at the gate, as you would be, and you have to split your time, I believe, between 3 campuses. So
yeah, so it's difficult.
but you just smile at them and say their name. That
Yep.
sense of being seen and heard,
Yeah,
I think, is so much more powerful than anything else.
I
Well, it
think
opens the door, doesn't
yeah,
it?
and I think I can't do my work unless I have a connection with them. So once again, like we talked about connection before correction. Like so.
I love all these
There's no
expressions. They're
point.
great.
Yeah, it's a little catchphrase that helps us to remember things, but I can't go in as a principal and have a tough conversation with a young person if I don't have a connection with them.
Yeah.
Because if the only interaction they have with me is when things haven't gone well, then that's not a great relationship.
No, I
Like
agree.
so
I
I need
agree.
to make a conscious effort to make sure that I build relationships with
Yeah.
people. And same thing with staff. Like there's no point me going in and trying to implement something if I don't have a connection with them because they're like, who are you and
Who
what
are
are you
you and
doing?
what are you doing? Yeah.
And you don't know anything about this stuff because you sit in an office all the time.
Yeah.
Like so, it's really important that people see you as a human being and that you have that connection. And I think that's the key to I would say most things in life, let alone leadership.
Yeah. So tell me about a success story. Like you must have a couple. You don't have to put the person's name because I think that can,
Yeah,
privacy wise. But there must have been a student, a boy, a girl that you've now worked with maybe over a few years that you've seen really change, and how Youth Off the Streets as an organisation has really been a significant part of their journey from either being homeless or at risk of being homeless, and now being able to maybe step out
yeah.
and continue.
Look, there's 1,000,
That's good to
and
hear.
and how do you measure success is another point, to think about because success for us isn't band sitters, like so, we did have a young person last year from one of our schools, gain university entrance, which
Oh,
was
is that a first?
not a first, but I'd say a rare,
Okay.
a rare occurrence for straight out of HSC into university, and to see that young person who looked, like wasn't the greatest student, if you wanted to go that way. Like, whenever I saw them at that school, they'd often be walking around the school out of class because they couldn't regulate very often themselves, so they needed help with co-regulation. There was lots going on, but the things that they love to do, they bought into, and that was really once in a powerful reminder of we need to make sure that the teaching we're doing is actually connecting with the young people.
That's right. It's tailored to their needs, particularly. I mean, especially in your particular setting, it
Yeah.
really does need to have connections to where they could end up going
Yeah.
in terms of hope.
Yep. So they gained university entrance. One of my favourite ones is that we had a young person come to school in year 9 who had been attending school. Their attendance was at 1% when they arrived with
Oh,
us.
1%.
So which essentially would have been probably one day that year or thereabouts. So they came to us at the end of term 3. So had a few weeks in term 3 with us, and then into term 4, and then at the start of the next year they were at 98% attendance.
Wow.
And it's that sense of belonging, and I think that's such a huge thing because young people need to feel as though they belong. Everyone does, like
Yes,
we work best in community,
we
So
do.
when you can make young people feel as though they belong somewhere and they feel safe there, then it made a difference in this young person's life, like So there's stories like that. There's a young girl. At one of my schools, who a couple of weeks ago, the SLSO came to me just to tell me how great that she'd done in the spelling test. Like which you think, it was a year 12 girl, and you think, for most people, like I'd say, if I was to go back to one of my other schools, a year 12 girl nailing a spelling test wouldn't have been a great thing that we celebrated. But this person had significant gaps in their education,
Yeah.
had never really spent the time,
And also probably not
learning
having
those things.
parents that or carers that expose them to reading, which
Yeah.
we know helps a lot in terms of vocabulary development and
Yeah.
confidence in
So
writing.
out of home care from the age of 14,
Oh,
like
wow,
so, independent living, at 17. So an amazing young person already. But then to see the celebration that happened because she nailed this spelling test, and the sense of pride in herself. And at first she was like, "Oh, it's not a big deal." But then once we actually showed her and talked about it, it was like, "No, this is a huge thing." And then to hear her talk about, "Well, I'm smart," like in this idea, I'm smart now because I, got 19 words right in a spelling test, and
So
this
is a lot of
amazing
what
thing.
you are doing for these young people is helping them to reframe the way they see themselves, because they
Absolutely.
would have such negative self-talk.
Yeah, absolutely. So we focus a lot on what's called the Circle of Courage, which is a native North American framework for, I suppose, the needs of a person. Yep. So it talks about how at the centre is the sacred child, and every child is sacred. And I think sometimes we forget that, and we forget the importance of the village raising the child, and how we have a responsibility as adults to actually help everyone. But the Circle of Courage talks about belonging, belonging, mastery, independence, and generosity. And the reason that sometimes our young people aren't presenting well is part of that is fractured. We need to
Yeah.
figure out which part of that is fractured, and then work on that to allow them to repair and meet their needs. And if we can do that, then that is that holistic person that
And
we're
there's that
after.
circle. If the circle is broken, then there's no flow through,
Correct.
no sense of
Yeah.
growth. So
Yeah.
you could reconnect the circle in terms of finding where the link might have been broken.
So we worked really hard on that belonging piece first, because
But I think that's in every school. That should be, and we do. Many schools I've worked in have always really tried to focus on a child feeling their sense of belonging in a school, finding their tribe.
Yep,
Yes,
very much so.
and if their tribe is not through a friendship group naturally, it could be through a group such as a sporting activity, an extracurricular activity like a hobby like chess or whatever it might be, drama or music. So
The connection piece.
The schools offer these, and encourage kids to try and find that connection because, as you pointed out, we can't really live it without a community.
Yeah. So
and we have to live within a community. We have to engage within a community.
yeah. So we talked about like no child is unschoolable. So therefore, like if young people have felt excluded or left out of school before, and look, if they're coming to us, they've got a rap sheet usually.
Yeah. Which makes it tough.
Yeah. So
they've already got a Mount Everest in front of them in terms of
So we flip it from the start, and the first thing we do is strengths testing, and actually we're not worried about all these things that you've presented with and are on your reports from other places. What are your strengths? And then we start to talk about the young person, and what their strengths are. And then our youth workers introduce them to the rest of the school with those strengths. So, this is this young person, they've got, persistence or resilience or empathy. For a lot of our young people, justice is a really big strength, and what their sense of justice is. And that's a really good connection point for me sometimes, just in the conversations we're having. I'm like, well, I know that your strength is justice.
And you hold them
fairness.
accountable.
Yep. So we're going to talk about what fairness looks like, because what you're seeing right now is an injustice. But if you look at it holistically, I love the fact that you see it as an injustice, but how about the other 30 people on our site right now, or 40 people? So how do we actually use those strengths to actually try and connect and see how they can use that in a way that benefits them?
So going back to Father Chris Riley, is the whole network of schools partly sponsored by the government or fully sponsored by the government? Is there still charitable works? Is there something that through this podcast we can make people aware of?
Yeah, definitely. Look, so we're not for profit, and I suppose our organisation, Youth Off the Streets. So we have there's 7 different schools, but we also have refuges. So we have youth support services that go out and do outreach in the community. We have 2 refuges in Sydney. We have our First Nations department, who do work out in Dubbo, in Maitland. So they're in Sydney, Western Sydney as well. So there's more to us than schools. And so often it's funny because people say, I didn't know Youth Off the Streets had schools.
Yeah, and that's why I was really keen to have you on, because I think people mostly know it as an organisation that helps homeless people and all these different facets, but didn't realise that there was a school. There's an actual branch now that, and was that part of Father Chris's vision?
Well,
he was the first
he saw,
one.
I suppose, very much in the frame of Mary McKillop, see a need and do something about it, and I suppose, obviously Father Chris has passed away last year, and for a few years before that he wasn't as involved in the organisation, so the organisation itself has undergone a transformation over the last couple of years. And it's very much, I get to live his legacy each day, which I'm, very privileged to do. But it's about how we can, see a need in the community and help. So there's still, up until last year, actually, there still was, the street van, the food van going out. So there's still a whole range of things happening besides the schools. The schools is one part of the organisation. So very much connected in community out in Dubbo and Maitland, and doing things culturally with our people out there. So and in terms of support, go to the Facebook page or go to the website. But there are fundraising things ongoing. So there's a hike in July actually, which you might love to be a part of now that you.
Oh no, I'm already committed
hiking.
this July, but I will be looking that up for maybe next future.
But there's things like we run a bike ride each year, so we actually had one down at my Wollongong school recently, which is just I suppose a bespoke event, to try and get some of our supporters to engage with our young people as well. So whenever we do things, we do try and engage our young people as well, to make sure that they're getting opportunities to learn socially, let's say
That's
that
another
social
thing.
interaction with
When they become
people.
homeless, they probably also lose a little bit of faith in being with other
Yeah,
people.
and it's that trust in adults,
Yeah.
and I think, so often they come to school and we talk about that connection piece and that belonging. Um, there's a reason why they're presenting each day the way that they do. Behaviour is language, and they're trying to tell us something, and I think we need to look at what they're trying to tell, and it's our job to figure out what that is, so often, and I think about my early teaching career where I saw behaviour as defiance,
Yeah, I mean, but Aaron, you and I have been teaching a long time in the education system a long time. We know that the education of teachers has really improved. When
massively.
I first started, a naughty boy or a naughty girl was a naughty boy or a naughty
Yeah,
girl, right?
yeah,
And we treated them that way. We punished them. It was reactive. Over the last 30 odd years, I think my greatest learning has been to learn more about kids, because the more you learn about them, the more you understand what they're doing. And as
yeah,
you said, actually behavior is more about they're telling you something they're missing.
yeah, very much so.
And
The unmet need.
and so it goes back to that relationship. So the more you know about them, the more you're going to find out what it is that's causing them to act out or withdraw,
Yeah.
whatever it might be in terms of the way in which they're engaging.
And Father Chris spoke about that idea that, no child is born bad,
Oh, I love that. I read that, by the way.
so
Obviously
I
doing
think
some
that's,
reading about Father Chris Riley, and
yeah,
I loved what he said about no child. And I say that at the universities when I was doing last year in the last 4 years, and I used to say no child is inherently evil. It was
no,
my phrase.
no,
I said they act out because of something that's going on in their
yeah,
life. And our job as teachers is to let them be seen and heard so that they can communicate what's happening so that we can reach them. Now, I also used to say it's not your job to be the nurse, the counsellor, the police officer. Your job is to educate them as well as you can, have that relationship, but then find those people within your school system that can add to that child's network
yeah. It's that
of
therapeutic
support.
web.
Yes,
Yep,
that
so
network, because I don't want teachers, particularly young ones who are going into the profession, to feel that responsibility
yeah.
that they have to do that.
And I think that's a really important piece on the wellbeing part of it as well, is that if you go in and think that you have to be everything for everyone,
Yeah.
then you do burn out,
Yeah.
and so we need to make sure that you use the support networks out there, and there are so many out there that people don't know about,
Yeah.
and I think it's about making sure that you do connect, with your youth liaison officers and the police, and make those connections with community to allow that young people to have that support network, because we're not there forever, and very
Correct.
much, we try to work really hard on this idea of we need to build our young people and support our young people so that when they leave our establishment, our organisation, they can still thrive, because at some point they are going to go out to the world. And
Yes.
if they have relied on us non-stop for the last 4
They could fall
years,
back into a bit like
then
jail, isn't it? When
yeah,
young go into juvenile centres or adults go into jail, if they don't receive some form of rehabilitation and
yeah.
or skills, they could be repeat
Well,
offenders.
just go back into
Yeah.
the same thing, because what else do I do?
Yep.
So I think that's where the education and the support is so crucial, to make sure that when they leave, look, I'd love to say that every young person is going to leave and go straight into a job or further education and training. That's not always the case, but we need to make sure they have the skills to be able to break that cycle. And I think there's things that we do around. Like, I was having a conversation yesterday with one of our lead youth workers, and talking about restorative practice. And I suppose the importance of naming it when we're doing restorative practice in our schools. And it's not because we need to make sure they know the theory behind it, but so that when they leave our school and they have tension in the workplace, they know how to deal with it.
That's right. They're seeking means of reconnecting and re-understanding context, you know
Yeah,
what I mean, in a more positive way,
yeah,
as opposed to being reactive and,
yeah,
and
yeah.
possibly getting themselves into trouble.
Yep. So that's why we need to name these things that we're doing sometimes, not so that they can go out in life and talk about restorative practice, because I doubt they'll ever do that.
But it's the
But the skill,
process.
it's the
The
skill.
skill of the
Yeah,
process, yeah.
yeah. So it's really important.
So what's one thing, let's end it with a positive. You've been working with them now for...
My third year now with Youth Off the Streets. Yeah.
Yeah. So you've obviously had lots of different encounters with different kids.
Yep.
You've seen success, but you've probably also seen some kids who struggled.
Yep,
So
definitely.
it doesn't matter how much help.
Yep.
Sometimes it takes time.
Yeah.
Maybe they're just not ready.
Yep.
You know, we talk about age and readiness as well, because that's
Yep.
often sometimes that can be a block. But let's end on a positive. If there's one thing that a child has taught you that you now take into your life every day, what would that be?
Well, I think it's that we need to understand that young people are incredibly resilient. Yep, and I think we underestimate their ability to grow and learn. I think we talk about circumstances, and sometimes we define people by them circumstances. And what I've learned is that we can't do that. You can't define people by the way they present each day, and that there is hope for a really great life for people out there.
And that the past is the past.
Yeah.
And you can't keep holding people back based on, as you said,
Yeah.
they come to you with a rap sheet.
Yeah, yeah, and young
So
people are incredible.
giving them hope that past is past,
Yep,
present is now,
yep,
future is what they're working
yeah,
towards.
and the other thing would be that young people want to learn. And I think that's sometimes society tells us. Like you read, mainstream media, and you talked about how terrible young people are these days, and the generation of young people. Young people want to learn. Young people want to improve, and we just need to give them the tools to do it.
Thank you so much for taking the time to be
My
and
pleasure.
come out of your very, very busy schedule and meeting me here on a Saturday.
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear that you've looked after yourself this morning. I feel very privileged to have heard your story and what you're doing for the youth that have in some ways lost access to what's important in life, education and possibility, and that you're giving, and you and your team and your teachers and the whole organisation is giving these young people hope.
Yeah, and I think that's probably a really good point. Is that it's the team. I get the privilege of leading and working with people, but it's the team on the ground that do the work each day. And I love the fact that I can walk in and be a part of it across the 3 schools. But the team on the ground and the team behind us do incredible work, and I just get the privilege of, as I said earlier, following Father Teresa's legacy.
Yeah, and what a legacy that is. And I, as I said, have really enjoyed our chat. Thank you so much.
No, thank you very much.
And that's a wrap on another inspirational episode of UThink. Be sure to subscribe, leave us a review on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you want to dive a little deeper into anything we touched on today, you will find links in our show notes. At UThink, we love partnering with local businesses that bring vision, creativity, and impact to their community. If you're preparing a property for sale, the styling crew Castle Hill know how to make a lasting first impression. Until then, see you next time.